Welcome to the Goat Rodeo, a podcast discussion about goings-on at the crossroads of technology, national security, venture capital, and geopolitics. I'm Garrett Smith, your host, founder and CEO at Reveal Technology, and I'm joined by my regular co-hosts and fellow military veterans Dave Cottle and Simon Kuhn. Simon is a true subject matter expert in all things government relations and congressional tea leaf reading, and Dave is our resident go-to-marketeer and defense acquisitions expert. We all work together at Reveal, and we like to drive discussions toward considerations for early-stage defense technology teams, investors, and policymakers. So let's get into it. I'm going to pick up on a thread from last week, Simon. How is it that you've only seen Skyfall? Of all the Bond movies, that's the only one you've seen.
So they're actually not very good.
I'll grant you that many of them were not great.
I have a friend rewatching all of them right now and posting as he goes, and he just got to Die Another Day, which is my favorite. Like, these movies are bad. I can't believe this, because it's the one where he goes surfing through like a glacier field with like a parasail or something, and it's Pierce Brosnan, which is the Bond that I think of as Bond in my head because that's what I grew up with.
That is flat out un-American. There's nothing more American, Simon, than a British spy.
He's British, bro.
I refuse to tolerate this anti-American slander. Also, could you imagine making like Die Another Day with this crazy CGI around the same time that Tom Cruise was getting Metallica to play the theme song for Mission Impossible, and you were doing like really cool stuff that still looks cool today? Like, that era of Bond movies does not hold up nearly as well as the Mission Impossible movies.
That's un-American.
It's an actual American spy in Mission Impossible. He did cooler stuff.
What else was going on?
Climbed that mountain. That was awesome.
The Jason Bourne movies were going on at the same time, so you had like that element. But also, one could argue that the Jason Bourne movies were almost explicitly anti-American, right? It was kind of like anti-agency, anti-bureaucracy, anti-deep state, all that stuff.
Not Tom Cruise. That man was saving the world. The only way you can't save the world. Running in slow motion, having flowing long hair.
You know what I'll say?
Hold on.
You know what I'll say, though? You know what I'll say? The Impossible Mission Force, the IMF, which is Ethan Hunt. I almost said Ethan Hawke. It's Ethan Hunt.
Hunt. You're right. Yeah.
Hunt. Ethan Hawke is the actor that. Anyway, I could go down that rabbit hole too. But Ethan Hunt works for the Impossible Mission Force, which is apparently in that fictional universe an agency of the government of the United States government. That's the stupidest name ever, and for sure could have been. I mean, it could have featured in the Trump world, right? The Impossible Mission Force. Doesn't that sound like a kind of a Trumpy sort of a?
Sounds awesome. It sounds like they do awesome and impossible stuff. Yeah. And
that's
look
exactly
cool
what,
while they do it.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Is for movies they kept referencing IMF, and you're like, what is that acronym?
The International Monetary
Fund. And it's the dumbest, and it's the dumbest name for a secret you could possibly think of.
Disagree. I'm an Archer fan. That was called ISIS back in the day.
Yeah, that's where
which is an amazing. That's an amazing spy agency name, especially. And the show kept going after the real ISIS came on the scene.
Yeah, I mean, you can't let go of it then. That's a freebie. You accidentally made the funniest joke of all time.
Yeah, you got to lean in.
Do you want ants?
You got to lean in.
That's how you get ants.
That's how you get ants.
Coarse grain sand. All right. So, Simon, I want to riff on one other recurring topic for us. You mentioned Ethan Hunt's long flowing American locks. Mm-hmm. What gives? Why did you chop it all off? Was it because we gave you so much grief last week for the barrette or whatever we decided it's called?
If anything, it caused me to hold on longer. Because if there's one thing that animates every decision in my life, it's spite. But no.
I've noticed.
The second most powerful force in my life is eliminating personal discomfort. And so it comes out a lot. It just sheds. Yeah. It clogs your drains. It requires work.
Yeah. I'm married to a woman, I know.
Yeah. See, I've never had that. So I was the first person to clog my own drains.
You have four women in the house?
There are 4 women in this house. I unclog drains for a living.
Yeah, I came to that inflection point. Either I'm going to have to start unclogging drains and accept that that's a regular part of my life, or do the man thing and destroy it. And that's what I did. I destroyed that problem.
On the topic of unclogging drains, President Trump's DOGE rolls on, and so again, another recurring topic for our discussion in 2025 as that apparatus rolls forward and causes all kinds of mayhem and the like in the U.S. federal government. I'll reiterate, long term, I'm optimistic. I think the American people and the American government and everything, our system is resilient. And, there are worse things than a drive for efficiency. However, in the short term, chaos. So one of the elements of chaos in this, especially for young companies, is going to be the upcoming looming potential of government shutdown and continuing resolution and all sorts of related topics. Simon, can you brief us on where we are with that? Updates? Is it more or less likely? I think the last time we spoke, you gave it a 70% likelihood, maybe even said 75% likelihood of government shutdown following the March 14 CR deadline. Is that still? Are you going to adjust that figure up, down? How are you feeling?
So the quick update is that things have gotten worse, but are tracking along the lines of where I thought they were going to go. Donald Trump and Speaker Johnson have both signaled publicly that they'd like to do a full year CR for FY25. And the head Democrat appropriator on the House side, DeLauro, has said that's a non-starter. CR is a non-starter. So this is that's the impasse. We have abandoned the idea now of doing a full FY25 bill. And by we, I mean the executive branch, the Senate, and the House majorities are all aligned with a full year CR, and the minorities are now aligned against it. So we're headed for the showdown. I think we're going to shut down for sure.
For sure. So you're adjusting the number up.
Yes.
Yep. It was 70% last week. What is it this week? 90, 95?
Yeah, I'd put it 90.
90.
The only public figure I've seen who has publicly put out their statement for an off-ramp is Senator Murray. So the lead Democrat appropriator has said we could do a short-term CR to avoid a shutdown and continue this conversation. But I have not seen anyone else respond to that just yet, saying, okay, let's go after a short-term fix.
And so a government shutdown, historically, I think we talked about this briefly last time, likely lasts a week or two before the political pressure to find an actual resolution and move forward results in movement. What does that mean? I think in the past we've kind of collectively decided that it's probably full year CR after that, but I mean, could it be something else?
Yeah, I'm not sure how they actually get to agreement on an FY25 bill. I think CR for a full year is where this eventually lands. I don't know how long the shutdown is going to go. And we've talked about this a bunch of times. This is the DOGE problem. The executive branch is cutting all over the place in order to find efficiencies and sort of refocus the government on their priorities. But they're not doing it in concert with Congress. They're getting way out in front of Congress. So you've set up this really big sort of constitutional clash between Congress and the executive. I think the federal or Supreme Court rejected Trump's freeze on USAID. So that funding for FY24 and now our CR should flow back to all these USAID programs that were cut. Obviously, lots of people have already been laid off, fired, contracts have lapsed. So there's a lot of problems there. But I'm not sure how you resolve. I'm not sure what promise the Republicans could ever make to the Democrats that the Trump admin is going to spend this money after signaling so strongly that they're not going to spend it. I think ultimately it has to go to the courts, and in the short term, I don't know. It's too close to call.
Impact of all this on the call it non-traditional contractor end of the U.S. national security enterprise, of which our company is a part. Are going to feel that squeeze because no new starts and all that stuff. Dave, how's this squeeze affecting you? What are you thinking about? How are you forecasting? What do you recommend?
Yeah, I think you nailed it. I mean, funding uncertainty, contract delays, no new starts, modifications are hard. or take longer. Like there's way fewer new business opportunities if we're spending at the current level as last year. Also looks like a shift in spending priorities where we've got to sort of hit a moving target here. I think that if I could summarize it all, what I experience is just overall increased government procurement caution.
So, I think that's exactly, you're going to see more of that, because I'm also not sure how the government's going to act during the shutdown. Traditionally, during a shutdown means no solicitations and no awards. And you usually see DOD put maybe a fourth of the civilian workforce into accepted status, which is to say that they continue to work without pay, and 3/4 of the workforce goes home, gets furloughed. That may not be the same. I think it's going to be really interesting to see how both OMB and the agencies determine who is essential or not. And there's two schools of thought there. One is anyone that I send home as not mission essential is now going to be on the chopping block when DOGE comes back around. Because if the government can function without these people, then why don't I just get rid of them entirely? So I think you're going to see agencies incentivized to classify more employees as mission essential. And then I think you're also going to see incentive from the administration itself to sort of not kowtow to the Democrats and basically say, yeah, you shut the government down, but we're just going to keep working.
So
no big deal.
So that's part of my fear, Simon, is like part of the way that we're supposed to shelter this coming storm is focus on sustaining existing projects and programs. And what happens if what I'm relying on, which is sustaining those existing projects and programs, like gets DOGE axed or gets reduced?
Great question.
That's what keeps me up.
Or other stuff, Dave, like, we've experienced disruptions to the program management, technical point of contact counterparts on a variety of different projects, programs, and contracts that we've been working on. And, that kind of disruption kind of at the minimum end sets you back in time, but also could materially impact the full execution of a contract or a full period of performance.
Absolutely. It's hard to execute on our current contracts when we lose our TPOCs, or when the test can't be conducted because the folks aren't showing up to work, or because the platform that we're testing on isn't funded, or the facility isn't funded. It's painful all the way around.
Yeah. And, a note from our producer is there's, other kind of ancillary impacts like government employee travel, going to conferences, events, exercises, that sort of thing. I mean, again, disruptive just to the normal kind of flow and order of doing business. It doesn't seem to me like those are going to be enduring problems. I think we do end up settling into maybe a steady state, but I could be wrong. Maybe I'm living in dreamland.
No, so we're actually feeling we're watching the impacts this week, right? We have 3 folks that face the United States Air Force this week at the big Air Force conference, AFA, and they said that they have never seen so few uniforms, and however, so many general officers appear to be the only ones that have a ticket to travel to the AFA conference.
So they're getting mobbed, in other words, which is what they always love. Plus, these places, this is like salespeople pitching to salespeople in their off time between pitching general officers. And so I can imagine it being, one giant kind of like sales sausage party going on. But I mean, on the real end of things, like many, many deals and programs and projects and relationships are forged, consummated, et cetera, at events like that. And so when you have a massive reduction in the, call it the target surface of uniforms and program managers, civilians and otherwise, that's a problem, especially if it's like, pan industry and not just this one trade show.
Yeah, I also feel unique pain with the contracting apparatus and the contracting professionals on the U.S. DoD side. They have seen some impacts already, or have been threatened with some impacts already, and I feel like the contracting community of experts of how to put companies like ours on contract and execute with them is already a bit understaffed. Much more reduction, and then they defer to large omnibus contracts and put the responsibility on the vendor for subcontracting, which is not good for businesses like ours.
Yeah, and in the past we've talked about offsetting domestic slowdowns with DOD or U.S. national security enterprise customer facing activities with more commercial work or more international work. I'm going to use that as an opportunity to pivot into maybe a next topic, which is, yeah, we've been disrupted over here, but can you imagine President Volodymyr Zelensky getting massively disrupted last Friday, and the trickle down kind of follow on effects of scrambling how to reconfigure things in Ukraine now that American aid has been cut off and the Europeans are, adjusting themselves. What does that mean for us and companies like ours in, call it the international space, and maybe specifically in Ukraine?
So this is an interesting one to me, because the last time we talked about this, I made the assertion that it's time for Euro trip, or it's time to double down on our foreign military sales to our NATO allies or our Five Eyes allies, or our European customers. But this is, I think, the development we're watching happening is, the U.S. government has been buying capability for Ukraine, or sending legacy capability and refreshing our U.S. DOD stores of capability. So that goes away. The conflict persists. So who's arming the Ukrainians? It's probably European nations, but is it European nations buying American armaments? Or do we now see more arms manufacturing competition locally in Europe? And are we going to get like Danish Anduril out of this?
Yeah, sure.
And unfortunately, I think the latter is more likely.
Yeah. So, we know about, our friends and partners in Congress have formed and are running a House level foreign military sales kind of committee structure that's advising the rest of government on how to configure American industry and regulation around it to facilitate foreign military sales. What do you think happens there? Is this maybe to pull on the thread that Dave just, started pulling for us? Is this going to be, not official U.S. military aid in the form of money or equipment going from the U.S. government to the Ukrainians or to the Poles or whomever, but an increased ability to transact, private American business transacting with European or specifically Ukrainian, buyers? What do you think about that?
Well, I think speed is going to be super important in the short term, which gets to the point of what Chairman Mast is trying to do on the House Foreign Affairs Committee is make it easier and faster for companies to sell overseas. And it speaks to Dave's concern, as the French president was just yesterday talking about how all of the EU needs to be spending 3% of GDP on defense now. So you're going to see this like math equation playing out. Spending on Ukraine drops to functional zero, but at the same time, American spending on Ukraine, and at the same time, all the European allies or some significant portion of the European allies turn their spending back up. There will certainly be some nationalistic desire to fill that role themselves. France is the number 2 exporter of military equipment worldwide. They recently overtook Russia because of the industrial hit that Russia has taken in this war with Ukraine. But it takes time to build those companies, right? So there's a question of, can we deregulate fast enough for American companies to be really competitive and kind of own that space? Or is it going to be burdensome and bureaucratic and slow and give time for the Danish and the French Andurils to rise up and capture that space themselves?
It appears to me that companies like ours, and we're not alone in call it the defense technology kind of renaissance upstart community, our products are classified EAR 99. That allows us to transact basically without restriction in the international buyer environment or the international marketplace. Obviously, that's not the case for everybody, but there's the controlled, the controlled lists, ITAR, munition lists, and the like. But do you think this ends up pushing companies to form around dual use and otherwise commercial technology stacks to transact with European buyers, maybe specifically Ukraine?
I think that dual use has been a buzz term long enough that most folks have already, to the extent that they can, set the wheels in motion to be as dual use as possible, right? Nobody wants to suffer under greater regulatory burdens. But I think to Dave's point, like the long arm of this is going to be a decreased reliance on America anywhere that they can. So this early period becomes critical because they don't have the infrastructure in some ways yet. But all the largest tech companies in the world, like pure commercial tech companies, are all American, and the Europeans know that. And I think there's a real reevaluation happening of who they want to be reliant upon for any number of things, not just defense. So the math equation here is going to get real complex real fast, but the advantage for folks that can already sell commercial, can already sell dual use, is speed. It's for sure speed.
It seems like the Trump administration is one that perhaps is not pursuing war as an aim, but definitely is intending to bolster the American industrial base, specifically in areas like AI research, crypto, all that stuff. But does that extend to the defense industry, like the legacy and the upcoming defense industrial base reimagined? Are those areas that we think will get positive attention from this new administration in terms of deregulation and kind of unshackling to go and transact and sell?
Oh, for sure. Absolutely. And you're seeing it in mining. That's what I think too. You're seeing it industrial base. The fact of the matter is, creating a robust and resilient defense industrial base cannot happen in a vacuum. There has to be a very big, robust, and resilient American industrial base, and defense can be a part of that. But you'll never build defense-specific factories that can run 24/7, 365, and that's all they do, and it's robust enough to protect our enterprise. We need to have a very large native industrial capacity that DoD draws from.
On that topic, and then maybe using this as an opportunity to shift and pull Dave back into the conversation. Lots of lessons learned from the battlefields of Ukraine, right? Ukraine is often referred to as a battle lab for kind of defense innovators, not just technology, but also concepts and doctrine and all kinds of stuff. But because we care a lot about technology and we're adjacent to, or maybe even in the thick of the drone industry, all those lessons learned on first-person view, FPV, kind of one-way attack, loitering munition type, low-cost drone weaponeering platforms, those are being expatriated. The learnings from the Ukraine Battle Lab are being expatriated to the United States. Testing, manufacturing, scale-ups, all that stuff is happening here. Is that a long-term? I feel like that's maybe a long-term tidal shift in the United States, perhaps reawakening the manufacturing base. Example, Anduril built and then I think just recently opened Arsenal 1 in Ohio. It's a large manufacturing complex which obviously has to promise some number of job creations with the opening of the plant. But it's specifically intended to build the next generation of robotic platforms at scale. So anyway, Dave, are you seeing kind of that energy and buzz still around Ukraine, especially as this kind of tectonic plates are shifting? Is it in the United States? Is it in both places? Is it more vital than it has been in the past? What do you think?
Absolutely. I think that we've seen new major programmatic efforts completely stood up based off of lessons learned or from the Ukrainian Battle Lab.
Give us some examples, maybe.
Yeah, so I think I think a good example is PBAS, and Ian will help me out with the acronym there. But the United States military, led by the United States Army, has decided to very meaningfully invest in cheap, attritable one-way attack UAS systems, and they are designed and the requirements are written around explicitly what Ukrainian forces have found to be effective. There's no question about it.
Purpose-built attritable system.
Purpose-built attritable system
program. It's a SEP program. Yeah.
But it'll be a major procurement movement over the next couple of years.
Is that the same as LASSO? I mean, we've talked about LASSO kind of offline plenty of times. Low altitude stock strike ordnance. That's also an army equity that smells a lot like one-way attack FPV drones.
There's a decision chain there, right? LASSO was meeting a directed requirement, which is get some stuff in the field right now. because we're tired of watching Ukrainians have one-way attack capability while, U.S. infantrymen don't. So, let's buy the AeroVironment solution. Let's get it in the field en masse and then figure out what the long-term sustainable program looks like. So there are a lot of folks that think the outcome of this is, instead of buying the exquisite Lasso systems or the AeroVironment systems or something similar moving forward, it'll be replaced with that PBAS attritable system, smaller, cheaper, higher quantity.
Yeah. What's the line? I forget, Dave, if you were saying this to me earlier, maybe it was Simon. It's something to the effect of Europeans are tired of trying to buy $1 million solutions to defeat $1,000 threats, right? I forget who was saying it. Something like that, something along those lines. So something has to give here, right? Something serious has to give.
Something seriously has to give for us to be competitive in that market. But also, it's important to remember that human beings are human beings. They're emotional creatures. The last engagement that I had with let's just say one of Europe's ministries of defense about a new project start, there seemed to be an emotional component. There was an emotional component of, are we partners or are we not? When it had been, lockstep, together, meaningful collaboration, treating like we were fighting on the same front for years, which was unfortunate for me to feel.
Like we NATO, not we. Our company is a great partner, obviously. Right? I mean,
yeah. No, I mean,
Dave personally insulted them and then had to do his own damage control. It was a whole thing.
Dave personally insulted the Minister of Defense from some Baltic country and then blamed it on NATO. Good job, Dave.
We've never felt the ocean in between us in our collaboration with UK, MOD, and other European partners. It just hasn't felt like that. And unfortunately, this week I had an interaction where it did feel like that.
Yeah. And I think there's a component for it as far as development of American weapons as well. Garrett, you talked about Ukraine as essentially a battle lab.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that you're for sure seeing from the new admin is this focus on shifting over to China, shifting to the Indo-PACOM theater, and the way our COCOMs, CENTCOM and PACOM, are looking at being that end user signal for what they need. You've seen a lot of increased over the recent years, a lot of increased activity from the chief technical officers at those combatant commands. And I think you're going to see a lot more of that as the administration pulls away from participating in the Ukraine conflict at all. You're going to need a new place to test and evaluate and get that ground truth on your stuff. And that's going to have to be the COCOMs. The COCOMs are going to have to step into that. And you're seeing some signaling within the Congress to fund the COCOMs more aggressively, directly, which is a real paradigm shift, right? Like if that becomes the norm, that is the inverse of the traditional relationship where the Army and the Marine Corps and the Navy train and equip. It doesn't do you a whole lot of good to train and equip folks if they're just going to go to Indo-PACOM and get a whole bunch of new stuff that Indo-PACOM has been spending their own money to develop and test and implement. So I think we're gonna end up in a really interesting new version of this thing as we have to identify new places to orient our solutions on and test them and evaluate them and make sure that they can actually operate in that environment.
Yeah, I mean, I was about to bring up the environmental, geographical differences, right? You've got trench warfare with one-way attack drones on a relatively frozen front line between Ukraine and Russia, right? Ground forces fighting other ground forces with attritable drones and all that stuff. Well, meanwhile, in the past week, unbeknownst to many observers across the Indo-PACOM AOR, China conducted military, naval exercises in the Tasman Sea right off the coast of Australia. And that seems pretty provocative and also extremely different from the lessons learned and the observations from Ukraine. So, reorienting energy resourcing mandate authorities out to COCOMs seems like an interesting avenue to pursue. What does that mean for young companies trying to develop and deploy technologies? Does that mean more direct relationships with COCOMs at the expense of developing relationships with call it force providers or program executive offices here in the United States? What is that? How does that landscape shift, Dave?
100%. As opposed to the focus being on the service components, on the program office, on the program executive office, et cetera, on the the S&T community that feeds capabilities into those places. I think that companies like ours, now your number one target, your number one customer, your number one stakeholder is the geographic command, period.
Yeah.
And that procurement actions, new projects, et cetera, are probably not going to get much traction or much movement unless they have a support of a theater or like premier units from a theater. And there's probably a priority order of which theater is important.
I mean, we saw some of that in that the leaked list of 17 protected kind of categories of acquisition activity for the Department of Defense. Otherwise, new Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth guided or even demanded an 8% reduction across all program expenditure categories, save these 17. And Indo-PACOM was certainly called out as one of a small handful of protected, kind of geographically aligned mandates. Also in the mix are U.S. Southern Border, Northern U.S. Northern Command, which includes the border areas. So I think this is, reading between the lines, this is the new Trump administration and new Congress's mandate to solve, border and immigration issues, transnational crime and drug trafficking type stuff. So all pretty interesting.
That was my point last week, was that list appears to have been largely written by the Indo-PACOM and Northcom.
Yeah.
But there's the chicken or the egg there, right? Like it's on the one hand, everything Dave said, it is accurate and true, but a protestation that this is our new focused area and this is where we want to be is not the same thing as creating the infrastructure to do long-term acquisitions and to truly fund these things. I actually don't know how I would advise a small company looking at both. I would say you need to kind of swim in both lanes. And you saw this is a long-term problem that you've seen with rapid acquisition authorities and units in places like DIU, where we can help you get up to a certain speed, but that doesn't get you programmatic adoption into the infantry of the Army so that everybody's getting your cool widget the day they land at their unit. It's like there's continues to be that disconnect, and I'm worried this COCOM shift is going to create the same problem. It's a lot of end user demand signal with some interesting funding pots, but there's not necessarily an acquisition pathway to catch this stuff.
Yeah, that was going to be my question, actually. Like, we've a lot of companies that have risen up through the upstart community in the last 5 to 10 years have come to learn and understand the landscape of front doors, so-called front doors to do business with the U.S. national security enterprise. But with a shift toward geographic combatant commands, what are those front doors? Dave, like, if it's shifting to Indo-PACOM, like, where do we send our business developers? And we have folks out at the Post conference in Hawaii right now, but that's just like one of many different potential avenues. What are the front doors you're going to have them knocking on?
Yeah, I think it's the units that feed those. I think it's, where for any given capability, it's it's still the user community that would use that capability or benefit from it, and the units that are engaged or deploying or on rotation to those, I think, are a good starting point. Historically, we've seen folks have success with TSOCs and the like, are going directly to that geographic combatant command. I think that partnering with the units that are responsible for that AO or for that area of operations is a pretty safe bet, or one that we found to be effective.
I mean, it kind of makes sense to me. Simon, you brought up the idea of DIU, Defense Innovation Unit. I'm going to try and pull together a few threads here to include this geographic realignment of authorities, mandate, priorities, resourcing. Obviously, there are some technology areas and some dual use categories that are especially interesting, right, for the defense apparatus. Defense Innovation Unit has served as a front door of sorts and has been receiving more authority and mandate and money and everything else year on year for the past many years since its founding in the mid 2010s. In parallel with that, we had a bunch of kind of like AI energy originally at the Joint Artificial Intelligence Center, the JAIC, which then I think either became or was merged into CDAO, which is now potentially, per the rumor mill, on the chopping block I'll be honest, like these organizations are so weird and sprawling that I don't know quite what they do aside from kind of the headliner AI tags. But Strategic Capabilities Office, SCO, CDAO, DIU, there have, I think, been rumors bouncing around the industry that all of these things are going to merge. Lots of companies like ours are trying to do business with these outfits. What do we do? Like what's going on? What happens to programs that are in this kind of in this threshing mill? Like what's going to happen?
Yeah, so I don't know. I actually really don't understand the thinking behind merging these offices, or maybe I understand where it came from, but just don't agree with it. So the way they're broken out, or what they're supposed to do, I'll get noted here. Fine. From my perspective, SCO's mission, the Strategic Capabilities Office mission, is to modernize existing weapons and existing capabilities that are strategic in nature, like modernization primarily. DIU is supposed to be for new commercial technology that could be adopted for commercial use. They're supposed to be the front door. And then CDAO is supposed to do AI, big data analytics, digital transformation at high echelons, trickling all the way down. I think the reason why people conflate these three things and think that they should potentially all be one is because their premier projects, or the things that they're known for, have more overlap than what their actual mission set is, right? So if you take them in turn, what is CDAO and that sort of sphere famous for? It's Maven, right? Which is AI-driven intelligence and analytics for ISR. What is DIU famous for? Well, at least from our perspective, DIU is famous for Blue UAS, which is, military grade small UAS systems. And then what is SCO most famous for? The Ghost Fleet Overlord and unmanned surface vessels. So the things that they're most popular for or most known for are not necessarily in line with their mission, which would make them more logical to lump together.
I'll note also that all three are likely relatively famous for not transitioning much into the fleet, into like the production kind of arena, right? I said fleet because I'm a Marine by background and I think in Navy jargon, but transitioning programs or transitioning capabilities out into programs hasn't necessarily been like the forte of these organizations. Is there some sort of strategic synergy that will actually yield good uptake on the kind of end user acquirer fielder community?
I don't think so. I'll say it bluntly. This is all top of funnel stuff. This does not get you into like the meat and potatoes of the actual acquisition and big scale fielding enterprise within the DoD. And it continues to be that struggle. We every time we have a urgent need or a new operational problem, we create a new limb of the DoD to get after that, whether it's MRAPs or if it's when the SCO was created to actually tackle great power competition. That was the buzzword when SCO was created. And they solve a thing or two, and then they just exist in perpetuity. And they probably do good work as things continue. I think DIU has, in particular, done a good job of reinventing itself. We're looking at this DIU 3.0 concept, but DIU looks very different right now from how it did when it was created. So these are like evolving entities, but evolving has never turned into meaningful, overwhelming input into these PEOs that are fielding weapons platforms, right? That is to say, the DIU does not have an F-35. It does not have like a premier weapons platform that they have turned into a truly fielded program of record that like DIU shepherded through.
I mean, the Maven Smart System, which is kind of the tactical application of the work involved in Project Maven, which if you don't know what that is, go just Google search it or something. That appears to me to be like a fieldable, relatively like broad spectrum capability that could get pushed into all kinds of different places. And maybe DIU is the vehicle to really just kind of like up level its visibility, transmission, and adoption across a wide array of joint stakeholders across the joint force. I don't, but maybe I'm just scraping here. I don't quite know. DIU is also famous for, I think, playing its political cards well to give it the opportunity to reinvent itself and along the way get increasing mandate and budget. And maybe it's just kind of like an eventual density of budget that gets them into the mix as like a capable joint force solution provider from dual use and commercial sources. But I don't know. Again, I might be scraping here.
I think we're headed there. I mean, you look, DIU and SCO both had to eventually bring on their own contracting capability. Neither of them was born with a native contracting capability. That happened over time. And I think when you look at what kind of capabilities have been added to DIU by Chairman Calvert at the HAC-D, we see a really increased level of funding. The original version of that hedge funding that went to DIU, that was $1 billion in FY24, had 12 pages of policy text that went with it, trying to get DIU more capable, running faster, and like being a true acquisition pipeline. So I think you're going to get there. And I think when we have these conversations about reforming requirements and reforming just acquisitions in general, it tends to look like systems that favor a DIU style approach. CSOs, commercial service offerings, the solution offering. Those are all the rage, and I think that
OTs, other transaction authorities, that sort of thing. Yeah,
right. A lot of that, and so DIU is simultaneously kind of a think tank for tech and capabilities, but also a think tank for developing ways to acquire tech and capabilities. I'm just not sure it's matured to that point yet where it supplants something like a big Army PEO.
And to your point, Simon, earlier, okay, so we've got commands that are now identifying the priority of our acquisitions actions. And we've got a list of protected programs or premier programs that they're going to continue to grow. This big, complicated acquisitions system that we have to arm the Eagle, you can't jam all of that into DIU, even if you merge it with other offices. I mean, DIU's got a couple hundred people or something. The entire defense acquisition apparatus for the US DoD is tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands. I think the last figure that I'd heard somewhere, maybe 150,000 people work for DoD acquisitions. How does all of that complexity fit inside? DIU can't run this whole clock unless it scales to probably 100 times its current size and authority.
Maybe it gets there, maybe it gets there. This does raise the interesting question, in an era of DOGE and in an era of Secretary Hegseth's 8%, cuts across the department. What does that mean for DIU? I mean, is DIU an insulated organization? I wonder.
I don't think so. First, not insulated, but I think all of the entities within DoD, they're bureaucracies. They're right. There are bureaucracies within bureaucracies. Even if you're a fast new bureaucracy, you're still a bureaucracy. And the institutional response to cut 8%, except for these 17 protected things, is to figure out how to color as much of your organization as those 17 protected things. Everything is now autonomous one way. Everything is AI. Everything is a Virginia-class submarine. I personally identify as a Virginia-class submarine, so I would be exempt from those cuts.
I identify as the U.S. southern border.
Yeah, exactly. So you're good too, and you're for sure seeing that already in the big POs, and I'm sure DIU is doing the same thing. How do we make sure that we're articulating what we're working on as being in line with the president's guidance, the SecDef's guidance?
Well, to wrap things up, Dave, I've got a question for you. And sorry in advance, it's kind of a personal question.
Go ahead.
It's come to our attention that your cousin is Randy Travis.
Whoa.
Did you know that, Simon?
No.
Yeah. I know you're a 80s, 90s country guy, Simon. What do you?
Yeah, big fan.
I know.
Same. My dad and Randy Travis, he is my cousin. My dad and Randy Travis, and I don't know the exact relationship. He and my dad grew up together in, I think, Marshville, Tennessee. And we're big on Randy Travis in this house. I sing my daughter Deeper in the Holler to get her to go to sleep when she wants Dad to sing. I'm not any good.
That's more American than Ethan Hunt, Daniel Craig, Pierce Brosnan, Matt Damon. That's American right there, Dave. There's no question. That's a tier above the previous conversation.
So yeah, good old cousin Randy. Plus, my dad built his own guitar and he's musically inclined. I got none of that. Can't sing, can't play the guitar. This thing's my wife's.
I was going to say, is that just a virtue signal?
I do right now.
That's just a virtue signal. Got it. Okay, got it.
just that's it. It's
marketing.
It's my wife's and she plays it and she's good, but I'm not.
Are those her books behind you too? What is she reading?
Yeah, I also don't read.
Yeah, she's big on the Hornaday Handbook of Cartridge Reloading for Long Range Precision Marksmanship. That's good. It's on her nightstand on a regular basis.
That's very good. Very good. So the real question is, can you source Randy Travis tickets? Is he still touring? I wonder.
He's definitely not touring.
He's not touring?
No.
Oh, okay. All right.
I think he's primarily in a wheelchair at this point in his life.
Oh, really? Oh. American right there. That's awesome. Okay, so everyone out in listener land, we would appreciate feedback, comments, keep the discussion going in the sidebar. Obviously, let us know if we're wrong. Send us notes. Don't be too mean unless it's to, give Simon jabs on the mop.
Never been wrong in my life, for the record.
Right. But hit us up in the socials. Give us a follow. Eager to hear about what you want to hear about here and what you want us to talk about. And we'll see you next time.